Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming and being a part of our webinar here on non-congregate shelters. We're just going to take one more minute till 2:33, and then we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this lovely December day, 12/12/24. I hope you all are having a good afternoon. And so we're going to go ahead and jump into the session. It is regarding the non-congregate shelters. It is the third information session regarding the activities for HOME-ARP here in Georgia. And the other recordings are on our site for DCA, and we've been sending out information on the YouTubes. That sounds funny. On the YouTubes that we put together in our MailChimps that we've been sending out. So if you are interested in taking a look at the previous sessions, please be sure to take a look at those recordings, okay? So today we're going to talk about, like I said, the non-congregate shelter, and we are going to talk specifically around all the requirements for it, just to make sure that y'all are aware of what we're going to be looking for when we release the NOFO in the middle of next year. So this is a time for you to start planning and getting an idea of what to, how to craft your plan for non-congregate shelter. It's one of the new programs with the HOME program. So again, this is American Rescue Plan funding, and it's attached to the traditional HOME program, which has really done or completed in funding for basically home building for the most part. And that's also not just single family homes, but also rental housing. And so the changes have been mainly from the individuals who will be living there to from income to their housing status, which is homeless, at risk of homelessness, domestic violence, including trafficking or fleeing, those things, and then severely housing cost burdened. And so they added non-congregate shelter as an additional activity. In addition to that, that's supportive services. And actually, come next year, we've been kind of teasing this, but we'll be releasing a NOFO for supportive services next year as well. So that is something that we can all discuss at the end of this time if you want to, because I know a lot of people would be interested in that, probably who are on this webinar. And then in addition to that, capacity building is what we're doing as well in the Supportive Housing Institute that's going on right now. Back. Okay. My feed paused for a second. That said, Jody, if that's the case, you're going to have to share your screen and we're going to have to shift. So hopefully that doesn't happen again. So anyway, so that's kind of where we're headed. Sorry, we didn't plan that before, so we should do that next time. So everyone, the activities that we're doing for ARP for Georgia is non-congregate shelters, rental housing, supportive services, and that agency capacity building that I talked to you about. And so considerations for all of our developments is making sure that you are looking at the qualified populations. All 4 qualified populations at this time need to be served on all of the sites for the upcoming NOFOs at the beginning of 2025. The referrals to units are a huge consideration for HUD, so we're going to talk about that. Referrals for services, all of y'all are in non-congregate shelters, so that's a basic part of what y'all are doing. So I know you're pretty used to that. However, other developments, it's going to be a little bit of a new type of thing, which is why it's included in this. the federal requirements. So we anticipate most of the developments to have many federal requirements. We're going to talk about those and the time involved. Procurement you have to consider, as well as low barrier housing first model. So those are very, very important pieces. So I will now turn it over to Jody to talk about our qualified populations.
So HOME-ARP has specified populations that they want to serve in this program. And those 4 qualifying populations are households that are experiencing homelessness, at risk of being homeless with incomes below 30% AMI, households that are fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking, other households receiving services or housing assistance to prevent return to homelessness, and households at 30% AMI that are severely housing cost burdened, paying more than 50% of their monthly income for rent. This slide goes into this, it delves a little bit more into those definitions of those 4 qualifying populations. And, when we talk about homeless, at risk of homelessness, some of these, like at risk of homelessness, we may all know people who are kind of couch surfing, going from one place to another. It's not that they don't have income, they just don't have enough to secure housing for themselves. So they're living with family or friends. Domestic violence, unfortunately, that's a problem that a lot of people who are facing homelessness face, are going through. And what HOME-ARP does, it's not only domestic violence, but it adds in the dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking. So, that expands more. ESG will serve the homeless people, but this expands a little bit more on that. And some of the people that qualify for HOME-ARP non-congregate shelter are actually some who are, in that diversion piece where, they're just in that gap where they may not qualify for other services. They would qualify under HOME-ARP. You're on mute, Malona.
So, Jody, can I add something real quick?
Please do. Please do.
Since y'all are wanting to build a shelter, which obviously is, it's not going to be like rental housing, a majority of the individuals we're assuming are going to be under the first category of homeless or soon to be homeless, which is why they're coming to a non-congregate shelter. So just know that with the way that it's currently structured is that for your wait lists for the non-congregate shelter, it is currently first come, first serve. Okay, we're going to talk about preferences and limitations in just a second. But right now, how we're going to structure this particular, right now as it stands, let me put it that way. We can talk more about, I'll talk about it after Jody's done, but talk about preferences and limitations. Right now as it stands, all 4 of these populations will need to be served, okay? And the wait list will have to be first come, first serve, okay? So just start processing that. I know that there's some of you who have very specific populations that you serve, and that doesn't necessarily mesh. We may have some opportunities to make that a little bit better, but right now where it stands with our program, going into this application cycle, we may not be able to do the preferences and limitations that y'all want. And all 4 of these populations would need to be served. Okay. So just start thinking in that area. We're going to talk now about what preferences and limitations look like. So I'm going to turn it back on over to Jody.
Mm-hmm. So the preferences can't violate any applicable fair housing, civil rights, non-discrimination requirements. Basically, it's those 7 protected classes: race, color, national origin, religion, sex, and other gender identity and sexual orientation, familial status. Like Alona just said, the non-congregate shelters have to serve everyone. No one can be denied. If they're homeless, then they need to be served. Upon approval by DCA and HUD, grantees may limit admission to provide a preference. But Alona, do you want to speak a little bit more on that?
Yeah.
Kind of what we've seen in the past.
So, and now that I'm thinking about it, this slide probably could have been a bit more specific now that we're kind of in the middle of it. So just to remind y'all, preferences are, as a quick definition, preferences are if you choose, for example, the homeless population out of the 4 qualified populations. That's QP1, as we call it. It's part of our lingo. So, so for QP1 is homelessness. If you have a preference for homelessness, okay, anyone who qualifies and is eligible as homeless would be put to the top of the list. I think I'm probably repeating this to a lot of people who already know this, so forgive me. I'm just explaining. For those of you who don't know, homelessness would be put top of the list. Then if there's anyone who is a QP2, which is at risk of homelessness, QP3, which is fleeing domestic violence, or QP4, which is overburdened your rent, they would always fall below that homeless. So if someone who is, let's say, fleeing domestic violence and they come in before someone who's homeless, the homeless person would automatically go above them on the wait list because there's a preference for homelessness. But the QP3 person who is domestic violence would also be on the list. So they both would be on the list. Okay. If we do a limitation, the limitation is that only one population is eligible for all the units. So there's only one population eligible for the wait list. So that could be, as we have seen in the past, chronic homelessness, for example. Anyone who qualifies as chronic homeless would be eligible for a unit. Anyone else who doesn't qualify as chronically homeless would not be eligible for a unit. Oftentimes, these particular limitations we see in chronically homeless and domestic violence shelters. Those are the two limitations that we often see. Okay. Right now, as it stands, we are not able to do preferences or limitations for these funds. We're looking at shifting that, but it may not be in time for this NOFO because we would like to get it out in the middle of next year. We're still working out the timing on it, okay? But just be aware that that may be a situation for the application process, okay? So I know many of you are probably having questions, and so which is fine. We can go ahead and discuss that later on. But we just wanted to make sure that you were aware of this, okay? And so again, it says upon approval by DCA and HUD. One of the specifics with regards to the preferences and limitations needs to be that it needs to go through the substantial amendment process, which has proven to be a very long process. We are looking to circumvent that a little bit by doing a substantial amendment for the whole state instead of by geography, which is an issue. And I'm going to put this onto the next section, that the geographic area needs to prove that there's a need. So we're going to take a look at doing that for the state of Georgia. And also provide access to all the other QPs. We need to make sure that that happens as well, that services are provided for all the QPs. So those are the two requirements from HUD. So we are trying to strategically find a good time to make all of this happen together. But again, the substantial amendment takes time in order to get it approved. So kind of in a weird middle pattern. And so more to come January and into February, we'll probably have a clear idea of what that looks like. So just know that we know that there are a lot of different feelings around this. We know that there are a lot of different understandings around this. And so just be aware of that. Okay. I'm going to leave it at that. So here's some information around the qualifying populations. There's the tool, and then also the policy briefs for the methods of prioritization and limitations. This will kind of give you an idea. And again, one of HUD's biggest things for this whole program has been access, and to make sure all 4 qualified populations have access to the units. And that's what we're thinking about, okay? And access to services with HOME-ARP, okay? So that's just one of the things that we've been hearing a lot from HUD. And that's why we want to make sure that it's important that all 4 qualified populations have access to all of the activities for HOME-ARP. Okay. So we're going to move on. Jody, I'm going to turn on back to you regarding low barrier screening.
Okay. So we're looking at this in like the housing first model. We want to make sure that we can just get people who are homeless into a good shelter, off the streets, out of couch hopping. So it's going to be extremely low barrier. A lot of the requirements are to, not look at someone's sobriety, income, criminal background checks, identification, residency, and mandatory classes. Low barrier screening also often provides spaces for pets and couples. Some of the examples of low barrier participant screening that we are saying should be used in all HOME-ARP developments, not just non-congregate shelter, are, applicants should not be denied housing for certain misdemeanors and felonies that occurred more than 2 years ago. Credit history should certainly not be considered for non-congregate shelter. Neither should evictions or lack of rental history. An eviction may be why someone is coming to your non-congregate shelter. And there should be no participation requirements such as participation in religious services or any other kind of property programming and activities.
And so just a quick kind of addition to what Jody was saying, we are making sure that we're using this for all of our housing conversations, just to make sure that we're really clear that there really should be no we're really trying to keep this as low barrier as possible. So alongside that, another thing would be drug testing should be another thing that should not be really considered with low barrier, and also making sure that housing first is really a big consideration with getting people in and getting people housed into permanent housing later on. So that's just, we know that housing first is more of a general, not really general, but it's a more of a long-term idea. But we just want to make sure that you're considering the low barrier direction, and we're aligning with our ESG program as well as with our Office of Homeless and Special Needs with regards to low barrier housing. So please note what they're already doing and what they're already promoting in order to make sure that that is all aligned as well. Okay. So this is a place to find more information on low barrier housing and housing first. Okay. So for our non-congregate shelters, the non-congregate shelter is defined as a private unit or room for temporary shelter. So there has been no time frame that has been required by HUD as far as 90 days, 120 days, a year, 2 years. However, so we're leaving it up to every shelter to define the time frame for all the individuals who will be staying there temporarily. There does need to be a lockable door and a bathroom for every unit. And so every household gets a lockable door and a bathroom. They do not have to have a kitchen or kitchenette in every unit. However, they do need to have access to some sort of kitchen facility. It can be in their unit. It can also be just right outside their unit. They can be similar to a quadplex where you have a little kitchenette where 4 units all use the same, or a very large kitchen area that all the units are able to use together. So just know that those requirements are a part of the non-congregate shelter. It's to serve individuals and families that meet one or more of the qualifying populations definitions that we just went through. And you do not require someone to sign a lease or an occupancy agreement. Okay. The eligible activities for the funding is to acquire structures or buildings, new construction with or without land acquisition, and then the rehabilitation of existing structures such as motels and nursing homes. Okay. Like we're going to talk about more ongoing operating costs. So money to keep the lights on, pay for case management staff. Those types of activities are not eligible costs for HOME-ARP money. So your agency and or organization will need to find funding from other places in order to fund the operating costs of your non-congregate shelter if you do receive this money. Okay. So please know that going in, and we'll make more mention of that in the future. So again, the eligible costs to acquire, you can use this to demo. Development hard costs, so that would be like, we call them bricks and sticks. So wood, any kind of what you need to actually build the building. Site improvements, so it can be that too. Related soft costs and replacement reserves. So that would be for like a large heating, the heating boiler. What is it? Boiler that have, large capacity type units and things that need to help the building be what it needs to be. So whether that be, a heating, AC unit, heating unit that's several, $10,000 to $20,000, those types of things that the replacement reserve could be used for. But that replacement reserve is primarily for the rehabs and not for new construction. Just know that, because your heater should be able to be good for that good, 10 to 15 years that the HOME-ARP building is being built for. So the replacement reserve is really more for the rehab. Again, operating costs are not an eligible cost, and the rehab and construction costs to turn HOME-ARP developed non-congregate shelter units into permanent housing is also not an option. Okay, we're going to talk about that in a little bit too. The referral to units, you cannot expand. Oh my gosh, I think I'm doing your section, Jody. I am so sorry. I'm just realizing that. Referral to units. So expanded coordinated entry. Well, do you want to talk about this, Jody? I know we're recording this. It's probably not the best conversation to have right now.
Oh, no, you're great. You're great.
So do you want to talk about
ahead? I was going to discuss the screening, but yeah, we can go ahead. So the use of coordinated entry with other referral methods. DCA cannot use the standard coordinated entry system for direct referrals to projects, but the order of referrals to projects and activities may not be determined based on the method of prioritization unless that method is described in the allocation plan. And if you wish to use the standard coordinated entry system method of prioritization, it must make a substantial amendment in its approved plan to adopt it. The use of the project activity waiting list, something that Alona was talking about earlier, must be used as the referral method, and eligible qualifying population will be placed on the waiting list in chronological order of application. That's going to be regardless, unless for some reason we do another substantial amendment and have that limitation put in there.
Well, and because this isn't, and to that point, Jody, because this isn't a part of coordinated entry, and there's a reason for it, guys. Coordinated entry, the way that it's structured and HUD's done it, as you all know, it's for people who are homeless, according to HUD. So that is in living in a place not meant for human habitation, and or in a hotel motel that's paid for by an agency. So for this particular program, because our 4 QPs go outside of that, most coordinated entries throughout throughout the country, are not interested in expanding their coordinated entry, which I totally get. And so these particular units may not be a part of the coordinated entry system. So, so we're going to be kind of thinking about this a little bit more, but right now at this time, it's going to be other referral methods. So therefore, what that means is you can have to the units, lots of different people, referring to those units. So it could be a local church, it could be, or faith house, It could be it could be the coordinated entry system in the area, but both of them have the capability of housing someone in that unit. Whereas with traditional coordinated entry, they would house the I shouldn't say house, they would hold the entry system, obviously coordinated entry, into those units. And with this format, the actual shelter will hold the ability to let someone into the unit or not. Okay, so they hold the eligibility. The non-congregate shelter staff would hold that eligibility, not the coordinated entry system. Okay. I hope I didn't further make it difficult for everyone to understand that. So go ahead and talk about the service plan, Jody. I'm going to hand it back over to you.
So there will be a service plan required for all applicants for funding. An affirmative marketing must be done to the 4 qualified populations, have to prove how you marketed to those populations, be proactive on your outreach in your community, and the 4 market to and referrals for the 4 qualified populations, which are again homeless, at risk of homelessness, domestic violence and trafficking, and severely house cost burdened households.
Okay, there we go.
You cannot charge a non-congregate shelter applicant any other fees unless DCA determines that such fees and charges are customary. And, and the same thing goes, they can't have a lease. And they must meet the criteria for one of the 4 qualifying populations. And Alona and I together have crafted a good pre-application that the agencies will be able to use to help determine and verify that they are qualified for the non-congregate shelter. And this is where you can find guidance on that. And we're going to make sure that everyone, if Alona in all of her greatness has not already sent this PowerPoint out, you will receive this PowerPoint in our blast.
Yeah, but and not greatness at all. You're way too kind, lady. Thank you. So that struck me. That's hilarious. So let's talk about federal requirements. So just to make sure that y'all know, because this is building, this is building with HUD dollars, okay, which are home dollars, which are from HUD. All of the federal requirements are a part of that. So all of y'all who are developers on the line or in the webinar, just start thinking about the federal requirements. And so we highly recommend you getting a grant coordinator or representative who is like federal requirements, who's very aware of those federal requirements. Start thinking in that line, because all of these things need to be met. We're going to be talking about Davis-Bacon, MeBe-WeBe, environmentals. So all of these are a part of this development. So you will be needing someone who is aware of how to do that on your team. Okay, so just know that as an additional potential cost. So environmental reviews will need to be done. Phase 1's for sure, possibly phase 2 environmental reviews, depending upon what you're developing. Okay. Davis-Bacon, and this is to make sure that we have prevailing wage on site, and that everyone who works for the or who works on the construction is getting the prevailing wage. And these are for developments of 12 or more units. Okay. So I am anticipating that most of you are going to be having more than, that you're not going to be having 11 or less units, which would mean that you don't have to use Davis-Bacon. So if you have 11 or less, no Davis-Bacon. 12 or more, yes, Davis-Bacon. And with the prevailing wage, that automatically means that your construction costs will most likely be higher. Okay. MeBe-WeBe, so minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses. This is just making sure that you are doing outreach to these 2 groups to allow them the opportunity to participate on site, and providing them opportunities to bid for all your needs in construction. And then we have section 3, and that's also employing individuals who are low income and low income business owners to be able to work on site as well. So this is kind of a general overview as far as the environmental review and the timeline. And so this just kind of gives you a time frame with all of this. Usually it takes 50 to 90 days for approvals for environmentals. And so that includes all of our staff reviews. That includes the NEPA reviews, which I'm not really, it doesn't show what NEPA stands for here. And quite honestly, I don't know. But we can find out for you if you really want to know. So looking at the public comment periods, looking at HUD reviews, which takes 20 to 40 days. So this just lets you know that there's some time that it takes in order for things to get approved prior to construction even beginning. So this is before your written agreement, which is your contract. This is before everything, before any ground can move on site. This needs to happen. Okay, so just know that going in, there's a lot of additional activity that has to happen before this does. Okay. So this just kind of goes over all the requirements for the environmental review. And so if you'd like more information on the federal compliance pieces for DCA, we have it on our website. This is under our rental housing program, but all the requirements are the same. We use that department to go over all those pieces. Okay. We also require procurement. That's a HUD requirement. Okay. So if you are, again, not familiar with procurement processes, and that just essentially ensures that everyone who is able to, I guess, be paid a certain amount of money from a HUD project is able to have even fair ways of bidding on the project. Okay. So the procurement pieces are all a part of, you can look all of these up. We did a procurement training also a number of, like last year, I think it was, maybe the year before even. Was it 2023? That's crazy. Mm-hmm. So it was back in 2023, but we had a great procurement overview that Kelly did. So that's something to take a look at. And so now we're going to move into construction and habitability, which is kind of fun to say. And Jody, I'm going to turn it back on over to you.
Okay. So the minimum HOME-ARP non-congregate shelter property standards, all non-congregate shelter units and common areas must meet all the applicable state and local codes, ordinances, and requirements, and the applicable provisions of HUD's lead safe housing rules at 24 CFR Part 35. In addition, all HOME-ARP non-congregate shelter projects must meet the same minimum safety, sanitation, accessibility, and privacy standards as ESG shelters, except for the space and security standard. And that goes back to each household or individual must have their own unit that has in-unit bathroom facilities with a lockable door. And so that's what's kind of different there. Do you have anything to add, Alona?
Okay. No, I think I've said everything I need to.
Good deal.
Do you want to talk about, the lockable door? Okay, I thought you were going to talk about the individuals must be provided an acceptable room to sleep with adequate space for themselves and their belongings.
Absolutely.
So that's the other thing that, I was waiting for that to be said. So really just be thinking that this needs to be a place that is allowed to help people house, much of what they're bringing in because they are homeless, as well as space for them to sleep. And so it really is just a lot of kind of SRO type of units. So a good size. I mean, not talking like 1,000 square feet. I mean, that is a really good size, but something a little bit, that's being able to really help them be comfortable. So.
Right. More private, absolutely.
Absolutely, more private, for sure.
All of the projects must meet the minimum standards throughout the restricted use period, and a project classification as acquisition only, rehabilitation, new construction is determined by the PJ's local code requirements based on specific work to be performed. So there are different habitability standards depending on which classification that you go with. With acquisition only, you must meet the HOME-ARP non-congregate minimum property standards described in the notice at the time of acquisition. And it must be operated and occupied and operated as non-congregate shelter without any rehabilitation. And we'll get into that in a little bit as to how the length of time between acquisition and you've signed the written agreement and when you start occupying that facility. Rehabilitation, the same. You meet all the applicable state and local codes, ordinances, and requirements, or in the absence of such code, the International Residential Code or International Building Code. And again, must comply with the lead safe housing rule at 24 CFR Part 35. With rehabilitation, you must consider the remaining useful life of major systems, like Alona was discussing, the HVAC, all that good stuff. And if establishing a replacement reserve, determine the remaining useful life of those major systems. And again, that's something that's different between acquisition only and rehabilitation. New construction, the same, got to meet all the applicable state and local codes, but again, there won't be a consideration for a replacement reserve for brand new construction. We have created a template, and it was based off of the one that ESG uses for the shelters that they help operate. But a few things to note with HOME-ARP is that each unit has to have one working smoke detector and one working carbon monoxide detector in each occupied unit, as well as all the public areas of the shelter. So, a common area, any kind of common area, a lobby, a kitchen, all that those items have been added into the habitability standards. And this goes to where, once that commitment begins, the requirements, once DCA executes a legally binding written agreement for acquisition only, non-congregate shelters can be operated within 6 months of the date of acquisition. Units acquired will not require rehabilitation to meet the property standards that are in the HOME-ARP notice. And for rehabilitation and new construction, development can begin within 12 months of the commitment date.
So let me just reiterate something that Jody just said, is that just for acquisition only, those are for buildings that need no work. So please, and they already meet all of the requirements for habitability, that everything is done, no rehab is needed. So if there is a really great operating, I'm using an extreme circumstance, but if you decide to purchase a hotel and it's already been in operation and things are, already going and they meet all of the requirements, it was recently rehabilitated and they're giving you a great deal and selling it to you for $10,000. Oh my gosh, everyone would be freaking out. And so if that's something that everyone can just move into, then that's great. You have 6 months to move everyone in. But if there's any any construction that needs to happen, even if you acquire a building and you need to rehab it in any way, then it would go to the second one where you would have within 12 months. Okay. So just know that that is kind of the process with this. So, and that's why they have acquisition only.
HOME-ARP funds will be awarded to grantees to build non-congregate shelters, and will be dispersed as a grant to reimburse your costs for doing so. And IDIS will be used once the commitment to a HOME-ARP non-congregate shelter project is met through that written agreement. The HOME-ARP activity will be set up in HUD's IDIS system.
So here, let me go back to the reimbursed cost thing. Oh, there we go. And actually, you know what? I'll just talk about that as we move into considerations. So y'all, just to make sure that you really heard that, you're gonna have to be able to front the money. So just know for your budgets, this is not something where we're able to pay you and then you can pay everyone else. You need to have a pretty good budget ahead of time because this is a reimbursable grant. Okay, so start thinking in that direction. And so we have our systems pretty, moving solidly as far as reimbursing in a good time. We have a great grants program or grants department to review that. And so they've been great about getting money out and such, but just know that it's a reimbursable grant. Okay. So for non-congregate shelters are restricted use periods. So this is as long as it needs to be maintained as a HOME-ARP shelter, is 10 years for acquisition only, 10 years for rehab, and 15 years for new construction. And this is DCA coming in, reviewing, doing our regular inspections. I think it's annually, if I'm not mistaken, that we have to come in and inspect.
Yes.
And the reason is I'm also thinking rental housing, which is 3 years, so or even up to 6 for that one. That one's kind of a little bit all over the place, sort of. So I just want to make sure I'm looking at Jody, making sure. So just start thinking as far as monitoring. This is the length of monitoring that we would have to do, which is shorter than some other programs, which is great. During the restricted use period, you have to remain as a HOME-ARP non-congregate shelter and be in compliance with the requirements of our HOME-ARP notice. And that includes how tenants come in or individuals who would be housed in the shelter, all the verification that you would need to do for their files, keeping their files, all those different bits and pieces. That needs to be used as non-congregate emergency shelter under the ESG program, in which the non-congregate shelter must be operated in compliance with the requirements that apply when ESG funds are being provided. So what happens is they give us the opportunity to decide if you want to have it as a non-congregate shelter under the HOME-ARP notice or a non-congregate shelter under ESG. So those are two different options. So if you're already a non-congregate shelter under ESG, an option for you for this grant, which is a really good one, is to make improvements or additions to your current ESG shelter. Okay, so that's something to consider with regards to this funding. Okay, so that's a consideration. I know that there may be some requirements as far as using ESG funds to operate the shelter. With regards to the qualifying populations. So I know that there's some pieces in there that we would need to work out, but that's an option too. We've also been talking with our ESG team about, just having these non-congregate shelters used alongside with ESG, but obviously, the group would have to be awarded ESG. You'd have to go through the whole, you'd have to go through the competition for that as well. And then these units can also be converted to permanent affordable housing and permanent supportive housing with regards to the HOME-ARP notice. So after all of the activities, and I think I have it, it's coming up. That's something to consider. So for those of you who are developing properties and are working with an agency to build a non-congregate shelter, these units can actually become PSH later on after specific minimum use periods. Okay. The conversion of non-congregate shelter to PSH is an authorization that we can do. But we need to know ahead of time. So when you're looking at your application, if this is a consideration for you, you need to let us know at the very beginning that we want to do a non-congregate shelter for the 10 to 15 years that is required. And then we're going to turn it into a PSH. Okay, actually, it could be even less. There's a minimum use period, I should say. But we're going to talk about that in a second. So just know that we need to know that ahead of time, and you need to put that into your application for non-congregate shelter.
Is this something too, Alona, that would be put in the written agreement ahead of time?
Yes, it
Gotcha.
is. Thank you for
Okay.
saying that, Jody.
Absolutely.
So absolutely, it's going to be put to the written agreement as well. And so during the restricted use period, but only after HOME-ARP minimum use period, DCA may permit the conversion of HOME-ARP non-congregate shelters to permanent housing or permanent supportive housing. Okay. The conversions may only occur in accordance with the requirements described in our written agreement and with the non-congregate shelter owner. So, and if the conversion is approved by DCA, the HOME-ARP non-congregate shelter use restrictions must remain in place until the project is approved for COC funding and the required COC restrictions are imposed on the property. So there is kind of like a conversion process, and making sure that it aligns to everything with regards to our current PSH programs. So there is a requirement as well for this, for PSH, and that it is for chronically homeless and homeless individuals and families. So they are specific about those two populations in our implementation notice for HOME-ARP that HUD wrote. Okay. So for those of you who do PSH with other populations, they're not eligible for this kind of non-congregate shelter turning into PSH option. Now, for other options, that is a possibility for HOME-ARP to be used as PSH, which we are focusing on in 2026. So just know that there are going to be opportunities coming up, just not currently, not in 2025. If anything changes, we will definitely make sure everyone knows that. But that's kind of our goal. Again, we want to make sure that we're getting our activities out there that are eligible for all four qualifying populations as HUD requires. As we've understood it, we want to make sure that those units, whether rental housing, non-congregate shelter, and even our supportive services, are being offered to every one of those four qualifying populations. And then we're going to be doing more very specific targeted type things later on. And that's been the thought. We want to cover that for HUD first and then moving into this specific targeting later. So this is all the conversion from non-congregate shelter to PSH. These are the populations that are being focused on. The tie into the COC is kind of important, I think, for most of the funding, or I shouldn't say funding, of if we're using it under PSH, it should be able to be connected to our COC program. Okay. I think there may be if you decide to not be a COC PSH, I think there are ways to work that out, but we would have to discuss that with you. We still know a little bit about this. We've not delved into this intensely, so we're making sure that you know that this is an option, though. So if this is something that you want to pursue, I have a question coming up, so I'm going to show you this. This is the minimum use period, and then I'll ask my question. For acquisition only, if you just acquire it, like we said, purchasing the really great hotel kind of thing that needs no rehab, after 3 years, then it can become PSH. Okay. There's a moderate rehab of the total investments or less than 75% of the appraised value. Then you only need 5 years. So if it's a fairly decent, PSH, like property that you have that you want to turn into PSH, it would need to operate for 5 years as a non-congregate shelter and then can transition to PSH. But that would be only moderate updates that need to happen. If there's a substantial rehabilitation, it needs to be 10 years before it can become PSH. The non-congregate shelter needs to operate for 10 years and then PSH. And for new construction, it's the same thing. Non-congregate shelter for 10 years and then it can become PSH. So after all of that we just talked about, I'm going to ask y'all, all 35 of you, are you considering, after hearing this, just a raise of hands, and it's like the little hand raising thing on the webinar. If y'all could raise your hands, if you're considering building a non-congregate shelter and then converting it to PSH later. Are there any of you that are looking at this as an option? Okay. So we have 4 or 5. Okay, good. So we have a healthy amount of you. Okay. So then what we're going to do then is we will delve into this. So we have 6 people-ish total, between 4 and 6. It comes back and forth, it looks like. So we do have a healthy amount of you who are interested in this. Thank you for raising your hands. You can all put them all down. What we'll do is we'll start working on policy about how this will look. So then that way we feel a little bit more prepared where this is concerned, and that way we can actually speak to it a little bit more, a little bit better and more, authoritatively when it comes to it. And Katrina, we'll go ahead and answer your question at the end of the webinar when we're taking questions, if that's okay with you. Unless you accidentally just left your hand raised. Okay, great. Okay, thanks. Okay, good. That makes me happy. Awesome. Okay. So we're also, just to let y'all know, we're partnering with the Office of Homeless and Special Needs. That's what OHSNH stands for, by the way. So I didn't think about that till now, actually. And it says it right there too. So I'm feeling better. Okay. Partnering with the Office of Homeless and Special Needs to ensure ongoing compliance with the habitability standards once the budget period ends in September. So just remember that the HOME-ARP money ends on September 30th, 2030. And so Jody and I will be free agents after that to do any kind of consulting work that you may have. I'm just joking. This is totally a joke. Hope you all know that. So the money ends on September 30th, 2030. And so what we're going to be doing is we're setting up all the processes with our Office of Homeless and Special Needs for rental housing with compliance to make sure that obviously all of these projects that we're building and all the buildings we're building are going to be lasting, we're hoping, a long time past 9/30/30. So we want to make sure that y'all have everything in place, everything is going to go well, and then we're partnering with them to continue the compliance after our office has sunsetted. Due diligence. So for all y'all wanting to build, developers, nonprofit agencies, everyone out there, let's talk about the hard, fast facts here. When you're looking at developing, we really want you to consider the financial feasibility of the development, okay? Considering that your operational expenses cannot be covered by this money, okay? Considering that this is a reimbursable grant, so the construction's gonna have to be fronted on a fairly regular basis. So we're thinking of doing the payouts on a quarterly basis, okay? So 3 months of work, and then we would pay back in that swath of money as far as quarterly of your project, not quarterly as far as, January, April, not that quarter of your project, 25% complete. Review the information from your owner and or property developer that demonstrates the project's financial feasibility throughout the restricted use period. So looking at this for the, 10 years, 15 years that's required for us to monitor, okay? Determine whether the owner intends to continue operating the project as a non-congregate shelter or convert to housing, permanent housing, affordable housing, or permanent supportive housing afterwards, okay? So think about that. And so there's going to be a lot more planning involved if you are wanting to convert, okay? We're going to require that you submit appropriate shelter skills. So if you've not worked as a non-congregate or as a shelter, just in general, if you have no shelter experience, this probably isn't the best money to be, applying for. We really want to have, because there's so many requirements with HUD, we want those of you to be fairly familiar with those requirements. you need to submit prior evidence of your experience operating shelters. We are going to need a budget and timeline and the sources. We would like for you to leverage these funds. We don't want this to be the only funding required when you are building. So just think in those terms that it would be great for you to partner, start looking for other funding, start partnering with your local jurisdictions, your cities, your counties to see about, what it would look like to have their support and funding with regards to the project, helping maybe acquire land. We have a group that's working with like even SPLOST and things that they're utilizing in order to build. So just start thinking in those terms. And so you are going to have to show us the operating budget as well. So because HOME-ARP can't pay for the budgeting, this is what we're going to utilize in order to sustain the the non-congregate shelter development, development, that's what I'm trying to say, the building for the next 10 to 15 years. So we're going to want to see how you plan to support this. Okay. Just know that project completion means all necessary title transfer requirements and construction work has been performed. We are going to require a land use agreement on all properties. So just know that there needs to be a recording of the LURA for your development for non-congregate shelter. And basically that land use agreement states this is what is happening on this land for this particular amount of time. And this is the only thing that it can do. So we're going to have to put the sheltering activities. If you decide to convert to a permanent supported housing or permanent affordable housing, that's going to be stated in the LURA. Those types of things are going to be very explicit in the land use agreement, which should be recorded at your county. Okay. It's actively operating as a non-congregate shelter for the term of, the restricted use time. You will comply with the requirements of the notice, with the implementation notice, which is on our website and on HUD's website. It's really easy to access. We finished all dispersing of all the money, and project completion information is entered into our IDIS system. So this is the programmatic supports, and I'm going to kind of go through this fairly quickly since we're at 9:30 or 9:30. Since we're at 3:30. We have a lot of information out there, and we plan to really be able to offer a lot to y'all in the future. So our website, which I am going to show to y'all real quick. If you go to dca.georgia, we have a new website now, guys. So dca.georgia.gov. This is the HOME-ARP website. Right now it's pretty basic, but here are the documents and downloads that you can go ahead and get from us. If you want to sign up for the mailing list, or if you have anyone who you know to sign up for the mailing list, you can do that on our website. Thanks, Jody. We have our newsletters from the past, if you want to take a look at them, that we've posted. We also have related links. We have an FAQ, which we need to build out a little bit more, but we're going to be doing that. HUD's HOME-ARP website, our allocation plan, and our substantial amendment are there. So those are all that we have from the past. We have office hours that we had 2 years ago. Now it's kind of crazy to say. And then our information session information. So that's going to be all posted there. Okay. Let's see. Then we have our program manual, which we're going to be posting in January. Well, actually, the rental housing will be posted in January. The non-congregate shelter will probably be posted closer to April. Actually, it's going to take a little bit of time. We're going to finish that up. The program templates. So this is something that Jody has been working really hard at. And so just know that we have a lot going on as far as all the templates you can use. We don't want to leave you guys kind of without a paddle. We want you to be able to just kind of take what we've already put together. If you need to put your branding on it, shift it up a little bit and then use it. For those that are mandated by all developments that we do with you, there is going to be, this is the form you have to use, but we're going to also give you opportunities to kind of have your own templates based on what we've put together. We're putting together a crosswalk to take a look at what it looks like with HOME-ARP plus home and all those requirements, and then also ESG. So also there is a crosswalk on HUD's website, which does that as well, but we were going to add a little bit of additional pieces from questions that we've received. And then also were the FAQs that have come through. So we're going to be answering some of those questions as well. So here are the crosswalks that HUD has already put together. So there's a lot going on, and we're going to do some Georgia specific questions as well. And then the general HUD information. The other thing too, guys, is here, I'm going to bring up HUD's website. So with this, HUD has a ton of great information. If you look at these topics, they have given us a ton of topics, a ton of trainings. So if you want to take a look at some of these, the implementation clinics or what they've put on recently, they had one just a month ago or so that was phenomenal. I don't think they've posted it yet, which was really, I think it was documenting, well, no, it wasn't documenting QPs. It was, I don't think they have it up yet. That you can go ahead and also look at all of these trainings. So I highly recommend, if you're really interested in knowing more as well, you can definitely talk to us. I think depending on when we're actually in the midst of a funding cycle, we may not be able to talk too much. So we're heading into the rental housing funding cycle soon, when the NOFOs released in January. So talking to us sooner than later would be great, because once that happens, we can't say a whole lot. But if you want to kind of know more, they also have a lot of like the resources for elected officials. I kind of like this one because the information that they have, like, let me see, which is a good one. Time expenditure, engaging partners. It's the QPs. There we go. This one is what I really like. If you look at the qualifying populations one, they had the branding on it is really great. It's very clear. So it talks about all of the 4 QPs. I'm sure you all can see this. And here, I'll close that. And so they have all 4 QPs, and then they give you some really great examples. Okay, so this is really a phenomenal tool to use if you'd like to use it. And then lastly, these are all the sites. So y'all are going to get this. Here's a place for you to go ahead and ask us questions. Our website, our listserv, and then any questions for either this webinar or after this webinar. So now is the time for official questions and answers. You guys can go ahead and put questions in the chat. If any of you guys would like to use the microphone, what I am going to do is I am going to actually take a second, and I will go ahead, actually, while I'm doing that, I'm going to leave it here so y'all can take note of that. I'm going to change our audio settings for you to be able to ask questions. Hold on. Here we go. It's settings, meeting options. Allow mic for attendees and allow camera for attendees. Okay, guys. So if you would like to, you can raise your hand. You can come off mute. You can put something in the chat. And I will go ahead and stop sharing, and we'll leave it open for questions now. And if we have no questions, oh, wow. Woohoo! For all of you, all just like stunned with what you have heard thus far. Sure hope that's not the case. So Jody, what just, we'll start some conversations just to kind of get things going. Jody, What have you found as far as some things from your standpoint, like the need to know for non-congregate shelter, or even just HOME-ARP in general?
I think once everything kind of came together for me, I think one of the most amazing things about non-congregate shelter is a lot of people when that aren't in boots on the ground think that homeless is just literal street homelessness. But there are just people, that are just literally couch surfing, going from one place to another who would qualify for this housing. I mean, for this shelter. And I think it's just a good foundation to get them from shelter to, more permanent, stable housing. It's definitely needed. And I see we have a question in the chat.
We do. So Katrina asked, if organizations serve multiple counties, do we apply for each county or one application? That's a great question, Katrina. And something that we didn't talk about, which is worth noting, is, Jody and I have actually talked about this as an option too, for smaller counties. This may be a great opportunity if you're into this. Can also use manufactured housing. So maybe not actual mobile homes, but manufactured housing are an option for construction for this. So for those of you who may be working with smaller counties, finding manufactured housing or doing like a few quadplexes, maybe 2 quadplexes, or a triplex or 2 in your areas to serve smaller counties, because this is shelter. It's non-congregate shelter. It's not rental housing. Um, you know, Setting that up and then using that as a shelter. And then maybe after, the 10, 15 years, you could transition it off to, permanent affordable housing or permanent supportive housing. So that could be an option too. But just know that that's a possibility. To answer your question, Katrina, I didn't forget. I would probably, there's a lot of considerations. I would probably do a regionally based non-congregate shelter, depending on the counties you serve. Because one is you have to consider how many people will be using your shelter. I mean, are you going to get an influx of, tens of people? Are you going to get an influx of hundreds of people? How many people do you need to serve? And then how are you going to operate it? What are the operating costs? And then where are you going to get those operating costs from? Is it local jurisdictions who are going to help pay for it? Do you have another private foundation or private community foundation that's going to pay for it? So those two things are going to be a huge consideration, because if you do lots of little shelters, you're going to have to figure out how to keep the lights on in all those little shelters. However, if you just have one shelter that's regionally based, you only have to work on those operational expenses for that one site. Okay, so just considering those in that place. I hope that answers your question, Katrina, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. So if you want to give us a thumbs up, that would be great. Okay, perfect. That's great. So Sharon asked, I was going to ask about manufactured homes. Thank you for clarifying for rural. Yes, absolutely. We think that there's an opportunity there for that, and we actually, even Jody and I, when we realized the manufactured housing piece is a possibility, there are organizations out there that do, triplexes and fourplexes, and, creating a little community of, those plexes. May be an option as a non-congregate shelter. And it is an uncharted resource, absolutely. And so we are more than happy to get a little creative with you where that's concerned. So, and we also realize that rural Georgia is definitely an area that kind of needs to be approached in a different manner. And so there may be some options that are basically, we just need to consider other options that will be able to fit the cost, because sometimes there are costs involved, because you don't have all the construction hands in order to put things together, because there aren't huge construction companies in the middle of South Georgia or rural North Georgia or other parts of Georgia. So maybe looking at a manufactured housing option is really a good way to go. Okay. So, yeah, you're Jefferson County. Awesome. So, yeah, so just go ahead, and if you want to actually have a little bit more of that conversation, and Jody, actually, you know what, Jody, could you, just because I'm in my talking mode, I think we really need to talk about the PSH conversions and then the opportunities maybe for rural Georgia for non-congregate shelters for manufactured housing and what that'll look like. So probably a webinar coming next year, maybe in the spring. And just to let y'all know, the plan is, yeah, I'm so glad you're excited. Yay. Yay, Sharon. So maybe what we need to start looking at is, because just to let y'all know, we're doing a NOFO for rental housing in January of next year. We're doing a supportive services NOFO alongside the ESG NOFO and all that piece in February, March, and April. So for those of you, we're going to have more information to come. So just know that we'll be doing supportive services opportunities then. And we're going to give ourselves a month to catch a breath. And then we're planning to release a NOFO for non-congregate shelter towards the middle of the year. So that's June, July, August time. I haven't said August. We're going to try and stick to June, July, but that would be great. Yep, supportive services, they're coming for sure. So as far as housing and SH. Okay, so I'm typing away. Okay, perfect. Yay. Yes, we're doing supportive services. More information to come. And just to let you all know, just a blip, since this is public and recorded, when you guys are thinking about supportive services, obviously it can't be tied to non-congregate shelter. Think offering it to all 4 QPs from your agency. It can't just be the people you serve. That's what we've been saying about all of our activities. And also there can't be duplication. So we can't necessarily continue anything that you've been doing, but if there's something that you've kind of wanted to move into to try out, something new, we probably can help y'all do that. So again, we can't duplicate. It needs to be offered to all 4 qualifying populations. And so there may be an opportunity for something new. If you look at the McKinney-Vento requirements, as far as the supportive services go, that's what we're looking at. So we're really considering a lot of great outreach, and we're also considering like housing navigation kind of things. But there's also other chances to do that too, and we'll be talking more about that next year. Sharon, I'm not quite sure. You have a session for the community, educate the state. That's great. Sharon, we would love some of that information. So if you could go ahead and send us an email around that, we would love to hear what you guys are saying. That would be great.
And Alona, as you speak on rural areas and all, are there different areas that this funding is wanting to go towards? You know, isn't it going to be more tailored outside of the balance of state? How are we looking at building that out?
That's a great question, Jody. I totally forgot that we didn't cover that too. And this was more just for general information, but we recognize that there are parts of the state that already received HOME-ARP funds. And so, so what we're trying to do is make sure that we are able to give the HOME-ARP funds to as many parts around the state as possible. And we also do understand that sometimes specifically for non-congregate shelters, in some areas, it's hard to support those operating expenses. So sometimes it makes more sense to have it in an area that has already received HOME-ARP funds, and maybe they can utilize their local HOME-ARP funds with our HOME-ARP funds and, really do a great shelter. But we also want to try and have these funds access throughout the state. That's a big focus for us. We want to make sure that rural Georgia is able to make use of this as well. So we are definitely trying to preference more those outside of what we call entitlement areas or participating jurisdictions. So that is kind of a thought process for us. And so I want to let you all know. So thanks for saying that, Jody. we are really looking at areas outside of the main entitlement areas or participating jurisdictions. Now, a basic example, which I think y'all know, is like City of Atlanta, which is great. We want to support the city, but we also know there's places right outside the city. So I know that I think I saw Teresa on, and she's in Douglas County. And so that is right outside, it's not a part of the entitlement areas. It's not a part of, it doesn't have its own PJ. It's not, so it's in the balance of state, but it's also close to metro. So we want to look at other, if you have an area outside of metro, great. I know Statesboro has been super active lately. I know that they're doing a lot with GIC, which is our Georgia. And I know we have a few of our regional reps on. So Georgia, I think it's incentive for community housing.
That's right.
That's what it stands for. Okay, great. So there's that group too. So I know Statesboro is doing a lot with that. Rome, Georgia. I know Dalton in Whitfield County is doing a lot. I know there's a ton happening in Valdosta. So those are larger areas which could also support a non-congregate shelter. Thank you for putting that up there, Jody. That's awesome. So, that are a little bit larger. They have the nonprofit support in the area that could support a non-congregate shelter. So again, guys, when you're looking at it, do your due diligence in the feasibility aspect of it to make sure that this could be a long-term, like you have the local support for a long-term development. Okay. So, but we're definitely trying to also look outside of the main areas that have already received HOME-ARP funding, because we just want to disperse it as far as we can. Any other questions, thoughts, ideas? So the other thing too that y'all may not consider while we're waiting for another question, right now we're just trying to, use the time up for those developers who are on site. Another part of this money that I think is a great opportunity alongside with the non-congregate shelters is the rental housing money. We're working to put project-based vouchers on the HOME-ARP units, okay, for a apartment complex that's being built. And on those units, obviously the 4 qualified populations have to be on those project-based vouchers in that apartment complex. And so this is not non-congregate shelter, it's separate funding. I don't want to confuse y'all. So in this separate funding group that HOME-ARP can do is rental housing, and that's building an apartment complex. And then a number of those units would be HOME-ARP that we put project-based vouchers on. Those project-based vouchers would need to be for the 4 qualifying populations. So an opportunity for rural counties would be to build an apartment complex with our rental housing money alongside the LIHTC program or the tax credit program, which is what we're partnering it with. But then a group of those units would be for people who are homeless and at risk of homelessness, who are overburdened in their rent. So it's kind of almost the potential to be kind of a pseudo shelter. So if your area cannot sustain a non-congregate shelter on its own, so that means all the, you can't sustain the operating costs, and you may not have 100 people a year who need to come through who need shelter. Okay, you may only have a handful of people. Wouldn't it be great to put them in an actual apartment that has a project-based voucher on it for someone who's in their housing situation of homelessness and at risk of homelessness or overburdened in their rent? And so that's an opportunity for the developers out there to possibly build in rural Georgia, to give them an apartment complex which can serve lots of groups with a tax credit building, but also be able to have a block of units in that apartment complex that serve people who are homeless and at risk of homelessness. So there's just a ton of opportunity with this money, everyone. So I hope you all kind of take it, and I hope we see a lot of great applications. And now's the time also to ask us questions before all of these NOFOs and notice of funding availability and opportunities come out. So then that way we can get some really great applications in January for our rental housing money. in March, April for our supportive services money, and then in June, July for our non-congregate shelter money. So there's a lot of opportunities coming up. Now's the time to reach out to us and ask questions. Now's the time to make sure that you feel informed, so then that way you can start putting your projects together, start putting your ideas together, and really, when it's time to submit an application, have something that's well constructed, so then that way we can go ahead and just hand you the money to go. I mean, obviously you have to go through the whole competition thing and all the scoring and everything. I'm not guaranteeing anything, but that's part of the process too. So there's just a ton of opportunity for the money. So I know I've been kind of trying to fill in the gaps of the time here. We have about 8 minutes left. What other questions do we have? I mean, I'm surprised if we've answered everyone's questions. You know what? While we're waiting for another question, let me talk about the substantial amendment. So a recent amendment that we did for a limitation for a recent award is that we had to, the amendment took 8 months to do. So we had to write it. HUD had us actually revise it a time or two, actually, I think twice. We did it alongside technical assistance. We did all these processes. And so we wanted to make sure that we do all the processes well, and it ended up taking 8 months. And so what we want to make sure this coming year is that we start getting the money out. The substantial amendment piece is going to take a chunk of time, it feels like. So that's why we're releasing the rental housing NOFO, making sure that there aren't any limitations or restrictions, because we want to make sure that we're able to use that money right off the bat. We're not planning on using all 50 million of the rental housing that we have, the rental housing money that we have. We're looking at only about half of that. So we'll have some left over for the future, but it really also depends on how many people apply, hint, hint. So, and then also for the supportive services aspect, we're not wanting to put any limitations and preferences on it, just because, again, HUD's been saying they want to make sure all 4 qualified populations have access to all of the activities that we offer. Okay, so we're trying to guarantee that by making sure that we create some rental housing, supportive housing, and even non-congregate shelter opportunities that allow all 4 qualifying populations to access those units, okay, and services. So, and then afterwards, really wanting to put together a substantial amendment that incorporates the whole state and what our needs are. And so then that way we can make sure that the future notice of funding availability at the end of 2026 end of 2025, beginning of 2026, we're able to offer those, basically being able to offer the preferences and possibly limitations when needed for the future. So I have some thoughts about how we're going to kind of get a good idea of what the state needs to submit for that. And that'll probably be coming out at the beginning of next year. As far as the listening sessions, I really want to plan some good listening sessions to continue the conversation around how additionally to use the funding. And so because we're well into the grant cycle, I can't guarantee any for sure things, but at least for the substantial amendments, being able to use the funding towards certain groups that we want to focus on, and making sure we get the data from y'all on how to show HUD it really needs to happen. That may be something that we'll need. So we're definitely wanting to do that at the beginning of the year. So that's another thing. Well, we have another 4 minutes left before we're officially done. Are there any other questions?
Alana, although you're going to get this PowerPoint out to everyone, I'm just going to go ahead and put in the chat the webinar form in case y'all have a question that you don't want to ask in front of everyone, or it's lengthy, whatever the case may be. There's the opportunity for you to still submit a question and get it answered.
Great, Jody. Thanks for doing that. That's fabulous. Good thought. I hadn't even, that's awesome. I appreciate you. That's fabulous. Oh, Margaret, you can come off mute if you want to and ask a question. You're off mute, but we can't hear you. Maybe it's on your side. But you may have to unmute on your side. Or you may have to type in your question, Margaret. We cannot hear you. Margaret, we still can't hear you. I'm pretty sure I unmuted everyone. Let me try people. I'm going to mute all and then unmute. It says that says attendees whose microphones are enabled will still be okay. Margaret, it says that you are unmuted on our end, so there may be a mute issue on your end. Okay. I have another 2 minutes. Okay. Well, Margaret, if we don't get your question answered in the time allotted, just make sure to use the form that Jody put into the chat, and you can ask your question that way too. Or y'all could send us an email. I'll go ahead and I'll repost this just to make sure that y'all are aware of who we are. Go ahead and take note of our email. You can do homearp@dca.ga.gov. Or if you want to email Jody and I specifically, you just use our first name dot our last name. And actually, Jody, why don't you and I put our emails into the chat? You guys can email us too. See a chat. There we go. Okay, well, we're at 3:59. And please be sure to copy and paste my email address because I have one L in my name and one I. So it's ILONA, not two L's. So just be sure to take note of that. And if you all have any other questions, just let us know. We really appreciate your time. Thanks for everything that you're giving to Georgia. And if you have any questions, just let us know. I already said that. And and get on our listserv. You can do that on our website. So then that way you get future information about everything we have coming out in 2025. It is going to be a banner year, folks. It's going to be fabulous. We're so excited. So yeah, we look forward to it too, Sharon. Thanks for saying that. And if you guys need anything else, just reach out to us. If you just want to have a crazy conversation, we're more than happy to do that too. Or I'm crazy, or very calm conversation too. So thanks everyone. You have a wonderful day. Happy holidays. And we're going to rock the new year with lots of good things to come. So thanks so much, everyone. Happy holidays.
Bye-bye, y'all.
Rest of your year, and we'll take care. Bye.